Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Public Programs and Events Manager here at the International Documentary Association. Thank you for joining us for this conversation around 1,000 Cuts, moderated by IndieWire's Ann Thompson. Before we get started, I would like to offer just a brief land acknowledgement, as we always do here at the IDA. I am coming to you today from Los Angeles, which is on the unceded land of the Tongva and Chumash people, who have been stewards of this land for generations. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, IndieWire, who helped bring this content to you today, along with support from KCRW. This is one of our final conversations before we take a little break for the holidays. Super excited. But we will return with you all in January. So you can visit our website, documentary.org/screening series to see our upcoming January conversations and films. And without any further ado, I'm gonna bring on Ann Thompson here to get this conversation started.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm very excited today. This movie is important. It's upsetting. It's timely. And I'm very pleased to welcome the filmmaker, Ramona S. Diaz, and the film's legendary subject, journalist Maria Ressa. Please join us. So Maria, thank you for getting up. You're getting up very early in the morning there in the Philippines. I appreciate this.
Not at all. Looking forward to speaking with you.
And you are, Ramona, you're on the East Coast. You're in Baltimore. All right.
Yeah.
So I would love to ask you to bring us up to date, if you would. Some things have happened since you made the movie, which debuted in January at Sundance to great acclaim. What is the current situation with the courts, and you were up on some pretty nasty charges, Maria? What's your legal status right now?
Every day we keep fighting. You know, there are 8 criminal charges that are ongoing. You've seen in June, the cyber libel case came to the first decision. We've now appealed it at the Court of Appeals. I have 3 more complaints complaints, meaning they may turn into cases. So these are brand new. And 4 tax evasion charges should come to a decision in the next few months. So gosh, in shorthand, and it's more of the same, but worse, because it's more of the same, and the runway gets shorter. But every single one of these will, regardless of if the decision comes, a signature will be there. And who said it? Martin Luther King said it, right? The arc of justice runs. So I hope that if I don't get justice now, we will get justice later.
Well, you both must have watched our recent elections with some interest. For me, certainly when I saw your movie, it was a chilling reminder of how dangerous and slippery our slope here is. Ramona, what did you think as you were watching the American election? Do we have reason for optimism, or are we still in great danger?
It's troubling that 70 million voted for him, right? So if you think about it in terms of population, it's every other person that you see in the street. So that is troubling. So hardly over, but at least his first step, I mean, someone, it's like reasonable is going to be in the White House. To me, that's a big sigh of relief. That really is. But when I was making this film, it became very apparent that the Philippines is a cautionary tale. And I think in a place like the Philippines, because it's smaller, you can see clearly what goes on, right? All the machinations that are happening are clearer because it's a smaller place. And therefore it's a cautionary tale. But as a filmmaker, I'm drawn to characters and stories. I never think, oh, this will be really relevant in 2 years when we release. The fact that it has become that is really kind of sad, because when we premiered at Sundance, a lot of people, I never mentioned Trump in the film. There's, I think, a couple of pictures of Trump and President Duterte, but a lot of people came to me and it was obvious it resonated with them, right? A lot of like Americans, a lot of filmmakers and the audience who lived here, it was really hitting home for them personally. Then I realized, oh yeah, this is there are a lot of parallels. It's really a cautionary tale. But we're there, a little step at a time. It's too overwhelming to think of it as a whole. So steps, baby steps.
Maria, what was your reaction and where do you think America is going? Are we out of the woods, or are we still in danger?
America squeaked by just by a little. I mean, I think you saw in the film, I feel like a combination of Cassandra and Sisyphus, and I know how it feels, like shocking to me, right? But look, regardless of who won the US elections, the fundamental problem is still there. And that's the fact that the platforms, the social media platforms that are now the world's largest distributor of news, prioritizes lies laced with anger and hate over facts. This is documented. That's what the research shows. That's what the data shows. And until that is fixed, we live in the upside down. This is part of the reason I think I spent this year trying to find out what can we do with this. And just this month, November, I co-chaired a group that came out. This is the Forum on Information and Democracy. We have a recommendation, 12 strategic goals, right? Stop playing whack-a-mole with our lives. This is kind of what the social media platforms are doing. Oh, we'll do content moderation here. Whack, 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 whack. I've gone as far as saying, if they don't move fast, I could go to jail. And really, truly, that is the foundation. The seeds of distrust, of division are in the very platforms that distribute that distribute the news we need for our lives.
So there's two different fronts here. There's the social media, Cambridge Analytica front, which is really scary, with Facebook very much on the front lines. What do you both think needs to happen here as far as fixing Facebook, which is the biggest problem, I think, unless you want to argue with that?
I will. Maria. No, you have solutions.
We have, please, I'd love you to read, we have 12 broad goals. It's starting with transparency, the fact that, Mark Zuckerberg can sit in Facebook and say, let me tune up news quality. And that determines for the entire world that more news quality gets distributed. And when he decides he'll go back to making more money, then he tunes it back down so you get more trash. That's a little untenable for the entire world. So it's not only 12 strategic goals, but more than 250 tactical ones, right? Nobody knows where this is going to go. But I think, like we in the Philippines, I have skin in the game. Let me be upfront with that, right? As we look over the abyss, you are doing that. Actually, and elections, I thought, gosh, Silicon Valley sins are coming home to roost, and Americans squeaked by. You have to do something about it.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. So I would like to know about the relationship between the two of you. As you said, Ramona, for the Philippines is a small country. You two must have come to know each other a while ago.
Not really. I mean, almost, actually. We sort of have this checkered past, if I can call it that, because back in like 2004, I was releasing my very first film, Imelda, on Imelda Marcos, the documentary. And I had to fly to the Philippines because Mrs. Marcos sued us in the Philippines. She had a temporary restraining order on the film. So I flew back to Manila, and the distributor said, the press want to interview you. And Maria Ressa's name was on it. And in 2004, Maria Ressa was the face of CNN in Southeast Asia. So I was like, oh my God, Maria wants to interview me. I was really, honored and thrilled. And someone said, she doesn't really like the film, it's just questions. I'm like, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to litigate my film. I want to litigate the litigation. I want to talk about the case, but not my film. And I was in the middle of this really hectic film festival circuit and tour. I was so tired. I was on my way to Sydney. I was only dropping in. I said, I really don't want to talk to her. And people said, no, you don't understand. You have to talk to her. No, you have to, because she's CNN. I'm like, oh, can you just tell her no? And so I got out of it. So 14 years later, like fast forward 14 years later, I am in her office asking her to be in this film, right? And I'm thinking, oh my God, I hope she doesn't remember. But how could she remember? It's 14 years. She's had so many lives, since then. And of course, I'm pitching the film. And then Maria goes, I've almost forgotten my 14 years ago. You turned me down. I'm like, oh my God, the woman remembered. And so there was a moment like, of course I can pretend I forgot. But I said, what's the point? I'm like, yeah, I did, I was young. It was my first film or something. I didn't want to I just didn't want to argue about the film. But I think very upfront. I said, yeah, I did. I'm sorry. Can we move on? Can you be in this film, please? And she said yes.
So as you proceeded to do the film, I'm curious how the film affected the course of the story that you were telling. And Maria, I have this sense of you, perhaps I'm wrong. You present yourself to the world. You are a very public figure. So I wondered how uncomfortable it made you to try on evening wear in front of a camera. That was my favorite scene. I'm sure you've heard that from everyone.
My sister, my gosh. Look, I guess at that point in time, we didn't know where anything would go. And having Ramona and the camera there, Gabriel, meant that there was extra protection, if that makes sense. That's the way I was thinking about it. It was that, regardless of what happens, this is a time to document. And we couldn't document it. Rappler couldn't document it. And I wanted to understand what was going on. I guess that was my first driver. And I felt like, so much was coming at me and I was just living minute to minute. So the first was I forgot that the cameras are there. Like literally you do forget because there's so many things. And then I think the second part is the reason I could forget is because two things about Ramona. I think the first was that she was always honest. And that is important because it's about trust, right? So there's so many things that have been filmed that are still there, but I trust that I trust her. And I guess that was the first step. And then I think the second one was Filipino-American, because we bridge worlds. There are things that could be misinterpreted in different cultures. I think, we spoke to the two worlds and we could talk about it. That Imelda story is a debate that continues going today, which is really about, as the observer, if Heisenberg uncertainty principle, I was a science major, this idea that the very act of observing changes what you're observing. And I was very aware of that. And I knew that the way to prevent that was to focus on what I needed to do, which was great, right?
So you're very famous in the Philippines, and part of what was going on during this movie was that you were out in the world as well. You were traveling a lot, pulling your thing and packing and going to different places to win awards and to give speeches. Was it important to have a higher international profile during this time, almost as a protective device? Because I felt like you were in danger.
Yeah. I mean, on both, right? And I think that I've always lived in this world where the work I do is in Southeast Asia, but for 20 years it was for CNN, which meant I always had to calibrate how this event, how this coffee will be interpreted with different lenses. And the only reason I think we're still alive is precisely because I live in those two worlds. I'm not so sure the Duterte administration knows what to do with me. I think they underestimated Rappler. They underestimated me because I don't play well with bullies, and I don't fight back with anger. I just fight back by giving you the facts, which I think our world desperately needs. And the kinds of, look, I mean, it's really President Duterte's fault that we got all these awards, because I just have been doing the same thing that I've been doing forever, right? So when Time Magazine gave the Guardians, the Person of the Year award, of the 4 covers, I was the only one at that point in time who was both alive and free.
Mm.
And that was shocking to realize, because I didn't realize it until that point. And when I first found out about it, my first response was really fear, because this means I would be more of a target. But ironically, it became a shield. And so I guess that's why. So until today, we keep doing what we're doing, and we shine the light. And you help us do that. So thank you.
No. Thank Ramona too. So the issue with Rappler, though, they keep trying to shut Rappler down as well. And you have like 100 journalists working there now, and it's the 4th biggest website in the Philippines. That's amazing. You started with 4 people.
Well, we started with 4 founders. It's like, in terms of reach, we have gone beyond what we could have thought. And we did that in the first year and a half. How does a little group at that point, we had 12 people fight? The old news group I managed, ABS-CBN, is the largest in the Philippines. I was managing over 1,000. How could we compete? Well, you can. And that was, I think, the best of times with Facebook. We knew Facebook better than Facebook did, and we used social media platforms to do that. But, we were also the first targets because we lived on social media. Here's the other part. Because we had no other business interests, because all we do is what we do, this site, we're still alive. ABS-CBN, the largest network in the Philippines, they lost their franchise. They were shut down.
Wow.
On May 5, right? So you have an idea of kind of how we are, I guess, what we are fighting and how we deal with it.
So Ramona, what were some of the biggest challenges for you in terms of tracking this story? Maria is part of the story, not all of it. There are others. I was particularly struck by the young journalist who was covering the killings on the street, who was so ravaged by her what she found.
Oh, Patricia Evangelista. Yeah, and the initial idea for the film was really, Maria became sort of the center of gravity, and Rappler did eventually as the story unfolded. But really, in the beginning, it was an ensemble cast. As you see, I still, Mocha Uson and the General Bato, allies of President Duterte, are still in the film. But it was more really ensemble, where we were following so many different characters, and I had like 2 units on the ground, sometimes 3. And it was difficult because everyone is all over the place. But we didn't count on Maria being like, starting to be the center of gravity of the film when she got arrested and we were with her, and then got arrested again. So the challenge was, she didn't stay put, right? She was traveling all over the world. I'm like, oh my God, this was not in the budget. So that was like, oh, this is interesting to have this conversation. But of course, you have to deal with it. You suddenly this character, Maria, we had full access, first of all. We were in places that we had no business being in. And she allowed us. So obviously, it became apparent to me that she was really the center. And so it was tough keeping up with her, right? The others were, you knew their schedule, you knew where they were going to be, but it was Maria one day to the next. She's like, what? You're going to Hong Kong tomorrow? Really, Maria? So yeah, it was just tough keeping up with Maria. All the others were, it was the midterm elections, and that was very intentional on my part, because the midterm elections, I knew elections would be spectacle, would be like cinematic and loud, and they were the other characters were gonna be part of it. So that was easier to track in a way.
So they gave you some decent access, actually, it seemed like.
Yes, they did. The president knew we were making the film, actually, because we needed special permission to be in the pit when he was speaking, as opposed to like the media,
right,
the media stand in the back, right? So that was special permission. They knew I was making this film, and we were very visible. So that was also our security. I think if we had done it under the radar and they found out, that would have been more problematic. But yeah, they were, because my pitch to them was that I needed to find out, because as they're not, they might be anti-heroes in some people's eyes, but in their own narrative, in their own story, they're never anti-heroes. They're the heroes of their story. So I wanted to know why, especially Mocha Uson. I wanted to know, she was a real follower of the President Duterte. There had to be a reason, right? And it turns out there was, because of her father's, assassination and stuff, which is, to me, surprising and fascinating. I think they were also running for office. They wanted to be part of the story, part of the narrative. They also know my work. I've done other films in the Philippines that have gotten some, that have had traction. So they were aware of the other films I did.
I'm actually interested in some of the things that are going on. You have movie versions of your documentaries in the works. Is that true?
Yes,
There's an Imelda, the Imelda one, and also the Journey one with Arnell.
yes. So the Journey one was sold to Warner Brothers, and John Chu of Crazy Rich Asians is attached to direct that. So I'm producing. How that happens when they attach. So they attach me as producer. And then the Imelda one is now a series for television. It's being developed as a limited series of 10. We're calling it the Crown of Asia, of Southeast Asia, but of course different, because she's not, she's an anti-hero. So it's so interesting to make the center of the series and the anti-hero, right? It's an interesting story to tell. Yes, but and I'm attached to direct the first and the last, and then we're gonna fill in we have 8 directors. Yes.
That's very exciting. That's
Yeah.
excellent. So the other question I have is what's going to happen next for you, Maria? You've got some serious questions to be resolved. You might actually go to prison, which is a horrifying prospect.
Yeah, I guess it's a fight for my rights. A few weeks ago, I looked at the Bill of Rights. The Philippine Constitution is patterned after the US, so our Bill of Rights is almost identical. And I just started ticking off which ones have already been violated. I'm now fighting for my right to travel. And I will fight, because this is very simple to me. So we'll see. That is in the coming weeks. And I guess, I listening in on your conversation, I think the other part, just in terms of what Ramona has captured, she has 800 hours of video, of film. And I keep telling her, please give that one to me, because imagine, I think she captured how you fight against a dictator, how a news group looks for a sustainable business model. This is something we had to deal with, because in the middle of all the cases, we dropped 49% of our revenue. January 2018 was the first charge. By April, we had no other. So fighting it, and I guess the other part is, instead of a focus on me, I want to focus on all the people that made that happen. So, last part is what you're going through in the States, what the news organizations did by pulling out of President Trump's calling a lie a lie.
Yes,
when
absolutely.
It comes from the top. This is something we had to deal with in 2016. So it's something that I guess she has to me. I want to watch all the film, which I think she did, right? I want to watch all the footage and then go, holy cow. But anyway, sorry, that's every time she talks about the film, I just go.
She wants to see, you're a journalist. You want access to all her information.
It's really interesting making a film about a journalist, because she's so aware of stories. So every time she'd say, do you have it? I'm like, what? I'm not sure. I'll tell you when I have it. I don't think so. No, I'll tell you when I do. And I never do, right? Until we cut it and we start post. So it was really just interesting to film a storyteller too.
So what do we have to be worried about now as we make the transition to the next stage? Because it feels like the United States does have perhaps a more robust criminal justice system, even if the government went close to where the Department of Justice isn't what it should be. There still seem to be some checks and balances in our system that we can hang on to. But you would argue that the social media aspect is the most dangerous now?
I think more than that, you have to think about it like, look, you're in the US institutions, American institutions were stronger, but again, just by a little bit, because in the end, what the social media platforms have proven is that human beings are human beings. In fact, they've proven that we all across cultures have far more in common than we have differences. And I think the core of this is that even as you've finished elections, the damage that has been done in 4 years, I call them influence operations, because Americans have been targeted. The Mueller report shows you in 2016, Americans were targeted on both sides of Black Lives Matter. And you see how it played out in 2020, right? When people are manipulated, this kind of insidious manipulation, not just for economic gain, but for power, which is what countries do, right? So advertising in today's day and age is different from what propaganda is in today's day and age. Think about social media as behavior modification systems. And after years of being there, what does that do to individual people? And then, when the platforms build division every one of the social media platforms they grow by recommending friends of friends, which means, and I say this all the time with pro Duterte and anti Duterte, from 2016 to today, if you're pro Duterte, by growing the networks over 4 years, you move further right. If you're anti Duterte, you move further left. And then this division, as growth on the platforms happen, is what allows different realities. We cannot live in different realities. The matrix is true today, and we have to come out of that and stick to the facts, right? Sorry, I can talk about this forever.
No, this is the most important thing in the world, because and Ramona, we have Fox News. We have other networks that are growing, that are becoming more powerful. And we have Trump. We know he's not going away. He's going to run again. He's going to use his popular base and all of this false information to build himself back up again. And that's what we have to look forward to.
But I think the other part of that is just remember when people's ideas and worldviews are changed, what happens to them? I studied this when I was looking at how virulent ideology of groups like Al-Qaeda changes people. It isolates them, and then they shift their entire worldview. Imagine that happening at mass scale. This is what's happened.
And it's growing around we have Brazil, we have other countries around the world as well. Ramona.
No, I've always wondered, so, social media incentivizes bad behavior or bad news or what evil, maybe not evil, but bad behavior. But can it do the opposite then? Right? Is that possible? I've always wondered if it can do that, and then incentivize good behavior. Because I remember your conversation with Tristan Harris, Maria, when he said that a lot of people, when people get off social media because they find happiness in their lives, right? What if then you can find it on social media, right? Then it's also good for business, right? Is that, or am I missing something? That's always what I've wondered.
Ramona, right? That was the reason we created Rappler, right?
Exactly. But you got crushed because the voices of hate were louder, and because the voices of the administration, they had the megaphone, were loudest. That's why you got buried under all that noise. But right. I'm wondering, right? I mean, if it is for business, right? At the end, it is really money. Can good behavior also mean money, right? If bad is money, then can't good be money? If all people are looking for is really happiness.
So as a quick response, in terms of Facebook, they won't make as much money as they do now. But yes, growth can be. That's what social enterprises have shown all around the world. That's what American companies living according to their values actually have shown, but not on the scale of $21 billion this quarter, which is how much Facebook has made, right? So there is a cost to making this much money. easy come, easy go. Well, when it comes easily, the costs are higher, and the rest of the world is paying the price of that.
Very well said. Very, very well said. How strong is Duterte going forward? Is he going to continue forever?
Well, he's a lame duck. You know, you're only allowed one 6-year term, and elections are coming up in 2022. But there is no real loud or strong opposition, and his daughter might be running, and he will be supporting his daughter. And she's pretty, you know, she's good. She's good at what she does. And I say she's Duterte without the dirty language, right? She's a cleaner mouth. She is, but she's also just a stuff. You can see the toughness in her. She's also a very interesting character because she is half American. She's biracial. She's Filipino American. She's Jewish American. She's actually Zimmerman Duterte. So it becomes even more complicated. A very interesting person, I say. So it'll be, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 2 years.
Maybe we need a sequel.
Oh, maybe.
I saw her reaction. I saw her reaction. Well, Maria, we wish you the absolute best going forward. Our best hope for a good outcome for you. And thank you so much for everything that you do, and keep up the good fight. And thank you, Ramona. This is a great movie, and yeah, I'm glad you made it.